What's up, my freedom-loving friends? Want to drop in with you real quick with a midterm election update, which I think is one of the more critical races, and it's the governor race in Arizona between Kari Lake and Katie Hobbs. The results are in. I would say disappointing results. So, Katie Hobbs has been elected governor. Let's put it this way. I don't know if she was elected governor. She wins the governor's spot. Before we get into it, there's a few key things that I think are very important here. That's why I wanted to make this video, aside from just informing you of the results. But first, please forgive the blood red background. I'm just going with the Biden vibe. You know, his historic speech that will certainly go down in history one way or the other. So I'm just trying to be presidential, my friend. With the Arizona governor election, words that come to my mind, there's a quote attributed to the piece of garbage totalitarian monster, Joseph Stalin. Communist ruler of Russia for a long time, committed so much genocide, but communism could work next time, right? Stalin words, what he said about elections are this: it's not the votes that count. It's the people who count the votes that count. It looks like it's possible. Corrupt powers that be in Arizona studied those words very carefully. So first off, setting the stage, Katie Hobbs in recent polls prior to the midterm elections, way down in polls. Some polls had her down by double digits. Now those are just polls. They're not tabulated legitimate votes. They're polls. But oftentimes elections turn out to be pretty darn close to the polls. This election turned out to be far removed from the polls. Katie Hobbs, who won over Kari Lake. Kari Lake was immensely popular. People loved her. They'd come out to her rallies in droves. On social media, she has hundreds of thousands of followers. At the time of the election, and her followers have just grown since the midterms. At the time of the midterms, Katie Hobbs had less than 10,000 social media followers on Instagram specifically. It was well into the 400,000s for Kari Lake, and I believe it was 6,000 or 7,000 followers for Katie Hobbs. Those aren't votes, they're followers, but it's an interesting metric to pay attention to. Katie Hobbs refused to debate Kari Lake. Then probably the most pertinent piece of information. What I just said is basically noise. There are interesting factors to consider, like how did this objectively unpopular person beat an objectively very popular person who was out there campaigning every day, had fields and arenas full of people, raving fans, loving her, wanting to vote for her. But then something that I think really counts here and can't not be considered is Katie Hobbs was the current Secretary of State of Arizona. She was overseeing the election. She refused to recuse herself. Now, many people who are, what we call it, logical, have a condition of common sense, we're calling for her to recuse herself. That's an obvious conflict of interest. It's just like if you have two teams in the Super Bowl and one of the head coaches of the team is also the head official. Do we see how there could be a conflict of interest? Fast forward to election day, because really the overarching question that I think I'm speaking to is, how did this happen? And I'll also say, I'm not someone who just jumps to there was always funny business going on if the results aren't what I like. No. Some people make those frivolous accusations about various elections. I only put weight in it when there's legitimate evidence. The evidence doesn't necessarily mean the nasty happened, but it means, this is evidence. And it would be a mistake to ignore the evidence. So fast forward to the election day, some things I'm sure you heard in Arizona. 20 to 30% of the voting machines were not functioning correctly. Apparently, one of the things that happened there, I read a report by an Army captain, forget his name, so discredit this video. But apparently what happened with some of the voting machines in that 20 to 30%, why they were malfunctioning, which, by the way, they were malfunctioning on election day. For whatever reason, Democrats are really well known for wanting mail-in ballots. I don't know if that's still because they're scared of Fauci's favorite sickness, but it's just a trend. Whereas Republicans, Kari Lake is a Republican, people wanting to vote for her, Republicans have a way bigger presence on election day. So on election day, they go to vote and 20 to 30% of the machines are malfunctioning, long lines. They filed a emergency injunction with the courts. Injunction might be the word. I'm a lawyer now, because that's the truth of who I am. But the judge refused the injunction to extend voting hours because people were waiting in such long lines. The machines closed at, I believe it was 7 p.m., so some people simply couldn't vote. Others who did vote, the machines weren't reading their votes correctly. Back to the report I read from this former Army captain, I believe, whose name is escaping me, said apparently those machines were programmed to read 19-inch long ballots, but the ballots on election day were 20 inches long. So when you put the 20-inch long ballots in a machine that's programmed to read 19-inch ballots, it's not reading them correctly. However, all the mail-in ballots were in fact 19 inches, the exact setting that the machines were programmed for. That's a problem. Now, mistakes happen. However, accountability has to happen. So in my delusional redheaded opinion, blood red background, you got to take me seriously on this one. Fear, blood red, you know what I mean? Obey. Could it have been a mistake? It could have been, but I don't think, it probably wasn't. Let's just be honest. And for the officials to just let it slide as oh, that was an innocent mistake, to me, that can't happen. There has to be accountability. Anything small or large that is an irregularity, in my opinion, absolutely has to be looked at as that was done deliberately, because if you don't do that, then there's no accountability. Accidents happen, which means there's no accountability, which means this race doesn't change. It doesn't change, and future races don't change. The future precedence is the bigger picture. That's the more important thing. So accountability has to happen. It's just common sense. It's like in football. If the ref throws a flag, offensive lineman was holding, that's a 5-yard penalty. If the offensive lineman says, well, I didn't actually mean to hold him, I did, but I didn't mean to, they don't let that slide. There has to be accountability, whether you meant to or not, you did. The reality is, this is what happened. There was a penalty. You have to be accountable for it. The penalty is enforced no matter what. That's a problem, in my opinion. Oh, did I mention, and I did, and I'll mention it again, Katie Hobbs is overseeing the election for her race in governor. That's interesting. So I also want to share, this isn't sitting well with people in Arizona. And there's more funny business that I won't get into. Hello, YouTube. But I do want to read, this is a statement published on the Gateway Pundit, but this is from a group of people in Arizona who want free and fair elections, period. And they're a group of people that are trying to hold the system accountable. I'll have a thought on that in a second, but first, here's their letter. They're demanding a special election. We got to do this election over on December 6th. Here it is. We demand a real midterm election immediately in Arizona. 3 strikes for Secretary Hobbs and Maricopa County. The officials in Maricopa County are actively obstructing the will of Arizona voters. Between the ballot stuffing via drawer 3, the 30% voting failures on election day, and unexplained extended ballot counting, the election in Arizona cannot be trusted. Yeah, it took them a week to tabulate the votes. Florida was done on the same night. It just leaves more room for things to happen the longer it takes to count. Anyway, enough is enough. Arizona citizens no longer trust officials to count the votes of Arizonians with fidelity. The track record of incompetence and obstruction by Arizona's election officials and Secretary of State Katie Hobbs over the course of multiple elections proves they're untrustworthy. We, the people of Arizona, deserve better, and we demand better. Demands for remedy. We immediately demand the following: a special master assigned to oversee Arizona elections, removing Katie Hobbs, Bill Gates, and Stephen Richer from election oversight. I have no idea how Bill Gates and Stephen Richer are involved here. I can't confirm or deny. I don't know. Number 2 of demands. Conduct a new election in Arizona on December 6, 2022. In-person voting, paper ballots, identification required, precinct-level counting of ballots on December 6, 2022. So count the ballots on the same day. Ballot counted at the precinct. This is really small, and I read out loud at a kindergarten level. Ballots counted at the precinct to be sealed and transported by the county sheriff to a secure location. Complete election process transparency. And it concludes by saying, Arizona citizens demand Arizona officials agree to these terms by close of business on Friday, November 18th, 2022. If these demands for a new election are refused, Arizona citizens joined by American citizens from across the country will peacefully descend on Arizona until the new election is conducted. Elections belong to the people. End of story. There's a massive amount of people that see that there was a problem here. And I don't know if you've seen the protests in Brazil over the past couple weeks. Brazil elected a new president who just got out of prison. He's a socialist and he won the election. These protests in Brazil have millions of people. If you haven't seen the pictures, just look it up on DuckDuckGo or your favorite non-tyrant controlled browser. And it's just incredible seeing people stand for free and fair elections. It's aside from free speech, that's the backbone of democracy. I think we've let that slide. I don't know what the solution is. So my understanding is Kari Lake isn't going to take this laying down. My understanding is she will most likely file massive legal motions to have recounts happen. I think that's very important for her to do. Do I think it'll be effective? No. I think she should still do it. My prediction is those legal motions won't be effective. First off, it's with a court system in Arizona that in 2020, they're like, yeah, but we don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? And it's trying to get a flawed system to fix a flaw in their own system. So working within the corrupt system to fix corruption, I don't have faith that those who operate the corrupt system will give a fair shake in legal matters to fix a corrupt, potentially corrupt element within their corrupt system. So as of now, Kari Lake has lost the race for governor in Arizona. We don't know the vote counts, but we know how the votes were counted. That's all we know. There's suspicion, and I think it could be a problem. But with that said, yeah, I'm disappointed. My fear was this is what was going to happen. You know, in any election, and I said this when Biden was running against Trump, what I saw in Biden, like first off, I know he's gone, but also everything Biden's doing, it was very obvious he was going to do it. It's just like, okay, what's communism? And he'll take things in that direction. And that's exactly what he's done. It was very predictable. But even at that election, what I was saying is, I know who I want to win the election, who I think is going to be better for the country. I thought it was Trump. But my biggest hope is that whoever actually wins the votes, that they're elected. Because I knew bigger picture, that's what's most important for our country. A 4-year stint with some destructive Yahoo, that's bad for the country. Setting precedents where integrities are eroded, if you know what I mean, long term, that is far more destructive. So that's a concern of mine. I don't know the complete remedy, but I do know is a corrupt system isn't going to remedy it. So it's up to us. I don't have the game plan, but I do know it's up to us. And I'm excited that people are taking action in the best way they know how. And of course, peacefully is most important. That's the latest update on the midterm elections, specifically the Arizona governor's race, which was a monumental race around the country. By far the most popular candidate, of course, Kari Lake has lost, and objectively the least popular candidate, Hobbs, has of course won. She oversaw the election, so she made sure everything was free and fair, which is just absolutely great. By the way, shout out to Hobbs. She ran on a woke platform, and of course, part of woke is virtue signaling about diversity. Those are really cool words, but her actions, she's literally been found guilty of racial discrimination twice in courts. So it's not just a frivolous accusation. It's like, oh, you actually did racism. And she was fined heavily for it. And luckily, she didn't have to pay the large fines. Arizona citizens had to, because she was in public office when she was committing racial discrimination twice. So anyway, she's governor now. She will be governor. But Kari Lake is taking the appropriate legal actions, and the people of Arizona are also taking appropriate actions from citizens. So will that put Kari Lake eventually into the position of governor? I doubt it, but I think these actions are still really important to show the actual will and true intentions of the people. And by the way, dear leftists, if Kari Lake does in fact, everything's cleared up in the courts and peaceful protests happen, all that kind of thing, Kari Lake is still not awarded a real special elections with a master overseeing everything. If that doesn't happen, I think this makes Kari Lake stronger. I think this strengthens her. She's not the sort of person who's like, oh, I lost, I'm done. Or even like, sometimes wasn't fair, so I'm done, I might as well go home. I think this wakes up a dragon. So my concluding statement, if all of these results stand as is, I think a greater good does come from this. I don't know exactly how that plays out, but just knowing, I know Kari Lake personally, knowing the type of person she is, as well as seeing her public persona, knowing what she stands for, knowing she's a principled person, this strengthens her. Worst case scenario is they just woke up a sleeping dragon who will become an even greater force for freedom. That's the silver lining of all this. With that said, thank you for tuning in to this midterm election special update on the Arizona governor race. It's my Biden impression. Roll the teleprompter back. Arizona governor race, period, end line, go to closing now. Tell them to stay free. Okay, until next time, stay free, my friends. Turn camera off. Turn camera off. See you, my friends.